Again, I'm Carrie Bourne. I'm from the Office of Continuing Education at UW-Whitewater, and we have hosted the Fairhaven Lecture Series here at Fairhaven Senior Services since 1983. I share that with the group here who knows, but we have a live stream going, and if anyone is watching in the future, we want to let them know what we do here at Fairhaven. This is our last lecture of the series, and we'll be back in February, so let's go ahead and get started today. Today's presenter is Susan DeVries, an assistant professor at the UW-Whitewater Biology Department. Originally a Louisiana native, Susan has investigated physiology and behavior in common mammal and bird species for 17 years. She has worked specifically with the Northern Cardinal for 14 years, where she examines relationships between hormones and behavior, and that is the current focus of her research lab at UW-Whitewater. Thus far, her dissertation has resulted in 6 peer-reviewed publications with this species, and she was recently selected to be a co-author on the Birds of the World species account for the Northern Cardinal, which was published in February. When not chasing cardinals around people's backyards, Susan is a wife and mother to 2 young daughters who never fail to keep life interesting. But for now, let's see why the Northern Cardinal is such a winner with Dr. Susan DeVries.
Thanks, Carrie. Folks can hear me okay with this? I've honestly never done a lecture before holding a microphone, so I get to live out my pop star dreams.
Take it off.
No, I'd rather leave it on just because I have little kids. Can you guys hear me if I project really well? How we doing? Good? That's okay. I'll use teacher voice. How about that?
Very good.
Okay. All right. One of the classes I teach at Whitewater is bio for non-majors, and I teach in that big auditorium that they have in Upham, so I'll use that voice today. All right? How we doing?
You can hold the microphone pretty close to your face, and that helps sometimes too.
Okay. Doing well? Good to hear it. I appreciate the invitation to come and talk to folks. The second invitation, the first one that I had to reschedule because I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old at home, and they never cease to bring in a cold at the worst possible moment. All right, you get it. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about the cardinal. Whose favorite bird? Pretty much everyone's. Yep, everybody loves the cardinal. Yep, and a little bit about some of the research that's been done with this species. It's been researched for a really long time, and yet we're still learning new things about it. It's pretty fascinating in that regard. And I'll talk a little bit about the research that I've done in the past and some of the research that I'm doing now. And then at the end, anybody have any questions about cardinals? I'll be more than happy to take them, okay? On the way in, I actually heard cardinals chipping right outside the parking lot, and I saw some old nest, presumably from the last breeding season. So you guys must have them in your backyards. I saw the feeders out and everything. You guys see them pretty frequently? Yeah? All right. So let's talk a little bit first about me, because everybody is wondering where this strange accent comes from. Carrie mentioned that I'm a Louisiana native, and that is true, but you might be thinking, man, she doesn't sound very Cajun, and that's because I'm not. I actually grew up in sort of like the toe of the boot, not far from Baton Rouge. And then I went to school in Lafayette, where I met my Cajun husband. And from there, we moved to Arkansas, where I started working with resident mammal species. Anybody ever seen a pocket gopher before? Yeah, little gophers, yep. I did my master's work with pocket gophers, and those are mean little buggers, okay? And it really got me interested in aggressive behavior and things that influence that. So while I was at Arkansas, I actually got to see a really good presentation about cardinals and how territorial they are. And it got me thinking, could I start working with birds? So I said, sure, let's give it a shot. And I found someone who was willing to take me on as a dissertation student in Mississippi, okay? So I went to the University of Southern Mississippi and worked on my dissertation there and chased cardinals around year-round pretty much for about 6 years. After that, I decided to move to the Midwest because, hey, why not? Let's experience true cold, right? We remember the polar vortex winter? The polar vortex winter back in 2013? That's when I moved here. Yeah, that's when I moved here. So everybody was pleading with us not to leave, all right? We stuck it out, and I've been here in Wisconsin since 2013. But I moved to Madison first, and I worked at UW-Madison with a research lab, and I actually switched species for a moment. I went and worked with European starlings, okay? Yep, worked with, yep. Did that for a couple of years, looked at relationships between physiological influences on song control and vocal communication. Had a good experience there, and then eventually got the job at UW-Whitewater and decided, you know what, I just have to go back to Big Red. I can't leave the cardinal behind. I love it too much, and that's been sort of the focus of my research group at UW-Whitewater. All right. Unfortunately, we're all masked up, so you can't see my face, but this is what I look like behind the mask, okay? This was a recent photo that my family took for our annual Christmas cards here. This is my husband and my 2 young girls. And this is me capturing cardinals in the snow a couple of years ago, and I'll have lots of photos throughout the presentation that look just like that. All right? So this right here is probably the crowning achievement of my career thus far. Cornell University is sort of like the mothership for all things bird, okay? If you want to know about any bird in the world, you go to their website, you access their resources, and you're going to find it at Cornell University. And about 3 years ago, I was approached by a couple of individuals who have a lot more experience working with cardinals than I do and said, hey, would you like to be a co-author on the species account? And a species account is basically a giant culmination of all what we know about an individual species. And they asked me if I wanted to be one of the authors for the cardinal, and of course I said yes, because it was just I couldn't believe I'd actually been asked. But anyway, this recently was published in February, and it's one of my crowning achievements thus far. I'm immensely proud of it. If you get a chance to check out the Cornell website, it's there. It's one of their most popular species accounts, as you can imagine. But whenever I was preparing for this talk, I was looking at this whole culmination of research. This species account is over 150 pages long. That's a lot of information that we know about a single species, and we're still learning about it, okay? So what I would do today would be hit some of the highlights and talk about how cardinals have sort of adapted to live with us as humans in human civilization and how we're actually helping them in many regards, okay? So way back in the 6th century, all right, we had philosophers get it right, that change is the only constant in life. Agree with that? Pretty much, yep. We are in a lot of change right now, okay? It seems like every week something's changing, more or less, okay? Well, whenever we talk about other species, they're subject to change too, okay? Whether you are losing your hunting grounds, like the polar bear here due to climate change, or whether you have lost your habitat due to human encroachment and deforestation, or whether you are contracting new illnesses like our lowland mountain gorilla here because of human civilizations nearby, change is something that is inevitable, okay? Sometimes it's good, sometimes for species, it's not so great. If you're looking at species such as these here that we call specialist species, so these are species that are really dependent upon certain types of resources for survival. What's going to happen is if those resources are taken away, like ice or bamboo forest, okay, they're not going to do very well, all right? And eventually they're going to be on the verge of extinction, okay? So these specialist species can't cope with change very well, and the number of days on their planet might actually be becoming fewer and fewer. However, we have lots of species that do great with change, okay, that do absolutely great with change. We've got our European starlings here who have invaded across pretty much the entire country. We have our coyotes here, which we see in our own backyard sometimes. And we have the Norway rat, which has made itself quite at home in all of our urban areas, okay? Well, one of these things that all of these species have that are able to cope with change really, really well, one of the things they have in common is that they're generalist species, okay? Meaning they can eat lots of different things, okay? And they usually have really robust immune systems, okay? And they can tolerate lots and lots of different types of climatic conditions. All right? Sorry, Carrie. I don't usually stay in one place whenever I lecture. So these general species here, these are going to be the ones that are going to do well. They're going to thrive because they can cope with change really well. The cardinal, I argue, is one of these species that can cope with change really, really well, okay? We all know what the cardinal looks like. We've got our handsome red male here with that nice red plumage. We have the no less handsome female here with the brown plumage and the red wings. She also has a little bit of red under her wings too. Pairs are often associated with each other from breeding season to breeding season, although they can divorce from time to time. A common misconception is that these are socially monogamous species. Well, they're like monogamous for a breeding season, okay? If one of them turns out to be kind of a dud, well, divorce happens more often than you would think, all right? So why do I think that this is a survivor species, okay? Why is it such a winner? Well, for one, it's a resident species. So that means it has to endure the heat of summers and the cold of winters. It can handle a lot of change. A second thing is that it adapts really easy to urbanization, okay? Really, really easy to being around humans. It actually likes putting a nest outside of the window in the one hedge that's been planted there. We see lots of steady population growth in this species, okay? Nothing exponential, but population sizes remain more or less constant from year to year. It's a species of least concern for the biological community. We're starting to learn more about the immune systems of this species, and they seem to be pretty strong. A lot of illnesses that other species of birds have, and it kills them eventually, cardinals usually do okay with. And last but not least, we're starting to see that Big Red is invading pretty much the entire country. It's making its way up into Canada, and it's making its way all the way over to the Pacific coast, okay? So this steady northward expansion means that it must be doing well, and it must be thriving, all right? So let's talk a little bit about what a resident species is. A resident species is one that is here year-round, right? They're able to cope with all different types of climatic changes, all right? They're able to cope with differences in food availability from season to season, okay? The cardinal does a really nice job of that, all right? And during the breeding season, young cardinals, baby cardinals, really need a lot of protein. So mom and dad go and find insects for them, okay? Well, mom and dad also eat a few of those insects themselves, all right? So they can shift their diet to more protein-based during the breeding season. However, in the wintertime, you're not going to see insects, are you? Okay? In the wintertime, it's going to shift more to being dependent upon things like seeds, all right? Makes it a good resident species. We also don't really see migratory ability with this species. There have been some reports that maybe we might have seen them move a few miles or so from their natal sites, but we don't see them making big mass migration movements. This is a species that really likes edge habitat, okay? Really likes edge habitat. And it actually likes a lot of invasive, non-native plants. It really likes dense foliage, such as what you see here, because it enables it to hide its nest really, really well. It also really likes to have these tall trees scattered through them, because what do you think they do on top of those trees? They sing. Exactly right, they sing. So if you've got the right foliage and you have a singing perch available and you've got decent food, you're probably going to have a cardinal come check it out and maybe set up a territory there. All right? This is a species that really seems unperturbed by humans, okay? Whenever we make sprawling suburban housing developments, they're actually okay with it because we're basically creating this nice edge habitat. All of the shrubs and landscaping that we do to make our homes look nice, They like that because it's usually a pretty good nesting site for them. For the past 2 years at my home, I live in Edgerton with my family. I have a small little house that has one shrub that sits right outside of a window. I have a pair of cardinals that occupies the territory in my backyard. Every year for the past 2 years, she has put a nest in that one shrub. Other places outside of our community would be better nesting habitats. For some reason, she prefers that shrub. She's had variable nest success. One year, her nest was fine, the babies fledged, they grew up to adulthood. This past year, she never had nesting success. Predators found the nest pretty easily. But cardinals really like this edge habitat. It doesn't deter them whenever we have a housing development pop up. They also like the warmer environment that an urban setting brings. Raises the temperature of the environment just a little bit whenever we have an urban setting. That asphalt soaks up all that heat, all right? That enables them to thrive a little bit better, to find food a little bit better. It's just easier to live when things are a little bit warmer. And urban areas like birds. They like bird feeders. They like bird seed. And whenever there's bird feeders and bird seed, you're going to have birds that find them eventually, okay? So supplemental feeding is actually believed to be one of the big reasons why cardinals are slowly making their way up into Canada, okay? I have a colleague who is working at a school in Michigan who's actually looking at this. He's looking at different relationships between food availability that you would find in seed as opposed to rural areas, and looking to see if that impacts where populations seem to be spreading. All right. Even though urbanization seems really attractive, there can be some downsides to it, okay? Whenever we're talking about an urban environment, we're talking about a situation where we're going to have more predators, okay? We got a lot of house cats roaming about, all right? We're going to see a situation where, well, there's humans, and we're not so great sometimes. Then we're going to see noise pollution, light pollution. We'll see increased competition for limited resources in some areas. And when you have more individuals flocking into one location, well, we're going to see the chance of increased disease in these areas, okay? Despite all of these potential negative aspects of living in urban environments, cardinals seem to do just fine. They seem to do just fine, okay? Anyone ever seen a cardinal doing this on a car mirror before? A few people are nodding. A few people haven't. Yep. So this male cardinal is looking at his reflection. And while I'd like to think that he's checking himself out for a hot date, perhaps, all right, he's actually thinking that his reflection is a competitor, okay? So he's thinking, aha, this guy should not be on my turf. What can I do to get him to leave? And female cardinals will do this too. They'll see their reflections in windows and mirrors sometimes, and they will attack the window or the mirror thinking that it's a potential competitor. All right. Eventually, usually they leave it alone after a little while, but nonetheless, this would deter many species from living here, just the noise of cars at all. Cardinals, not only do they think it's okay, they actually look to compete with it in some regards, all right? But we see cardinals singing in areas where we shouldn't necessarily think we would see them, like on power lines. They have no problem coming up to our windows and feeding on next to them. And it's because of this, all right, as our human population grows, it doesn't necessarily deter their population growth. It instead allows for their distribution range to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Because it's getting bigger, it's a species of least concern, okay? Meaning that we don't worry about what kind of numbers we see from this species from year to year because we don't necessarily see like mass die-offs, okay? Not a whole lot of things really bother a cardinal so much, all right? While, yes, predators do take out a few, house cats being the worst of it, in over 14 years of field work with cardinals, I've only ever seen other predators consume cardinals twice. And it was hawks that managed to take them out, and it took them out while they were feeding their offspring, Okay, so it took something as serious as young for these birds to actually be taken out by predators. When you're a red bird, I kind of have this idea that you kind of have to be hyper aware because you stick out. Okay, you stick out, all right? So in all of my field work I've done with these birds, I actually did most of it wearing camouflage because they were super hyper aware of any time any of us were in the area and didn't necessarily perform behaviors as naturally as we would like them to. We figured it out. We basically would stalk them like hunters, all right, and collect good data. This is a species that has a really long breeding season, okay? In some parts of the country, it can breed for up to 6 months out of the year. That's half the year, which is really long for a songbird. They establish territories that, for the most part, they keep from year to year, from breeding season to breeding season. They will defend those territories with song. Both male and female cardinals sing. We don't hear the females as often as the males, but they both do sing, and it's similar song structure. Both males and females will also loosely defend their territories during the winter. Okay, well, it kind of makes sense. If this is your territory and you live here year-round, all right, you have to defend your resources year-round. So we see that both male and female pairs that stay together on a pretty consistent basis, that they will fight for their territory year-round. And I'll share a little bit about some research that I've done with that in just a moment. This is an open cup nester, meaning that their nests are out in the open. You're not going to see them in a cavity, okay? They are out in the open, and they can nest up to 8 times a year, okay? Do they nest up to 8 times a year? If they have reproductive success in the first or second nest, typically no, okay? Because that's a lot of effort, all right? Reproduction, raising the kids, that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of energy. That takes a lot of calories, okay? If they have reproductive success in their first or second nest, they usually will go ahead and molt, switch out those feathers for the fall, and be on their way. However, if they keep getting their nest depredated, if they keep losing the nest, they can try up to 8 times a year. When I was in South Mississippi, I had a very handsome female cardinal that we suspected was getting a little bit towards the end of her reproductive years, okay? And her last year that we knew she was on the site, she attempted to have 5 nests and never had any breeding success. Now, I don't know the end of that story. I hope that it did end happily, because when the temperatures got up to 98 degrees, we shut it down for the field season because it was too hot for us and too hot for the birds. But that female kept trying to have breeding success, and they don't reuse their nest. So they'll build 5 different nests, trying to have a different clutch in each one. It's pretty fascinating. So the trade-off with that is that, well, by being able to breed readily and having so many nests, you kind of absorb the cost of, well, our nests are very open. They're very open for predators to just reach up there and have a handful of eggs. They're not well hidden, but it's okay because we can nest anywhere. So in the end, it works out. It's a pretty effective strategy for them because their populations are growing in size. One of the things that people often ask me about that they don't realize is that both male and female cardinals feed their young. And they don't just do it only in the nest, they also do it after they fledge the nest and they enter the teenage equivalent years of life, okay? So both males and females will feed their offspring. Males will actually feed more in some situations than females will. And they will feed their young until they are ready to attempt a new nest themselves. Then they have a really hard time kicking the young out of the house. So this is a little bit of dissertation work that I did a few years back in South Mississippi. And like I said before, what got me into all of this cardinal craziness was I really wanted to find out, why are they so aggressive, okay? Well, I was working with a researcher who was my dissertation mentor, who was an endocrinologist. She studied hormones. She looked at relationships between hormones and behavior. And I said, well, okay, can I start looking at testosterone? Everybody blames testosterone for being aggressive, so let's see what happens here. So that's what I did. And what I did was I took cardinal decoys, okay, and I put them on territories, and basically it was a lot of fun. I got to make the birds mad, okay? So these territory owners would come in and they would just beat the mess out of our decoys, all right? Some of them would beat the mess out of them. This poor decoy here had feathers pulled out of him several times, and one bird ripped his head off once. This took a trip back to the taxidermist to fix that one. That was a lot of hot glue. This one, okay, we ended up putting next to cardinal nest to see what they would do in response to that. And she also had feathers pulled out and had her head ripped off on at least one occasion. We didn't always see the same response, though, with every bird, okay? Some birds came in really hot. I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to kick your butt, and I'm going to move on, okay? Some of the birds didn't want to mess with the decoys. They came in, they would sit up top, and they would just sing, hoping that they would go away. But then the decoys didn't go away. So what we would do was, if we got lucky, all right, we would catch the birds trying to attack the decoy, and then we would take a little blood sample, okay? And what I did was I looked at levels of testosterone in birds that showed different forms of behavior, some that were really, really aggressive and some that weren't so aggressive in both males and females. And I found out that, yeah, these birds can be really mean, but testosterone levels didn't really seem to matter. So birds that were really mean didn't have higher levels. It was kind of a mystery. They could produce testosterone, we could detect it, but we didn't see sky-high levels in those birds that were pulling the head off the decoys. All right, this was a fun video clip that I took in a colleague's backyard. All right, see if it'll work here. Watch my decoy. There he goes. I'll show him one more time. This was in my friend's backyard. It doesn't show it, but off on the side here was actually the female with the male. They both showed up to take care of the male intruder, which was pretty cool. Another thing I looked at for my dissertation work was looking at relationships between testosterone and parental care. So we all know some individuals are really good parents, and some of them are not so great parents, okay? And in some species, they have found that individuals that are really good parents usually have lower levels of testosterone, particularly males, and individuals that are not so great parents sometimes have higher levels of testosterone. So that was a question that I had looking at this particular aspect of their behavior, okay? Birds provide really good comparisons for human behavior in this regard because humans, males and females, both provide parental care. And that's kind of hard to find a comparison in the natural world to that because let's face it, most other mammals, we don't see males and females providing parental care. It's usually just the female's responsibility, all right? Most songbirds are a little bit different because males also have to contribute or the nest isn't going to make it and the babies aren't going to make it. So what I found was I would watch these guys feed their babies, okay, on multiple days in the nest, and then we would catch them and we would look at hormone levels and see if individuals who had higher or lower levels were better or worse feeders. And what we found was that, yeah, they still had testosterone circulating, but it didn't really matter as far as what kind of parental behavior we saw. We saw some fantastic parents who had kind of high testosterone levels, and then we saw some really awful parents who had really low testosterone levels. So testosterone, in a way, didn't really seem to make sense in this particular relationship like it had for other species. We haven't done a ton of work on cardinal immunity yet, but it's evolving, it's developing. People are becoming more interested in it. Birds in general can harbor lots of different diseases, okay? Songbirds in general can harbor lots of different diseases. Anybody aware of like the mystery illness that we had come through earlier this year in certain parts of the country? where they asked people to take their bird feeders down. And in the end, they still really don't know what happened. It just went away. They think there might be some type of relationship maybe with the cicada boom that happened in those areas. They're not really sure. But there were birds that they were just finding, lots of them juvenile on up through adulthood of certain species. They were finding them dead at feeders, and they didn't know why, because it was none of the usual suspects that we see with bird illnesses. Cardinals, okay, get a lot of different illnesses, but they do okay with most of them. They actually get a lot of mosquito-transmitted illnesses really, really easily, okay? So West Nile virus, we're familiar with this vaguely, all right? West Nile virus, when I was in South Mississippi, really, really put a damper on the blue jay population in that area, okay? The cardinals did just fine. And studies with these guys are showing that they actually have antibodies circulating against West Nile virus, which means that they had it at some point in their lives and they beat it, which was kind of neat. They're also finding that many of juvenile cardinals, so birds that aren't even adults yet, have circulating antibodies against various forms of encephalitis, okay? Avian pox. Anybody ever seen this on a bird at a feeder or whatnot? Yeah, avian pox is this disease that causes these skin lesions to occur on the birds in areas where they don't have lots of feathers. So their feet, their beaks, etc. Turkey hunters back home used to refer to it as wart head, where it would have all of these lesions that eventually would impact their ability to see, impact their ability to eat, and ultimately can be fatal. It's highly communicable. If you see a bird with pox at your feeder, you take it down and clean it immediately. If we catch a bird with pox, we clean our equipment, clean our hands, and actually wash things down with Clorox, okay? Cardinals get pox readily, and most of them do just fine. All right? So all of these things about the cardinal's immune system from these limited studies that we have thus far seem to suggest that this might be why it's so successful here, because a lot of the diseases that are fatal to other songbird species, these birds do contract it, but it just doesn't seem to impact them as harshly. And last but not least, we have a nice expanding distribution range with this species. So the first fossils of cardinals were actually found in what is known as modern-day Florida. Anybody familiar? I would love to be in Florida right now. Nice warm beaches. These first fossils were actually of cardinal beaks, which they believe were dated back to about 1.5 to 2 million years ago. So this is a species that's been around for quite some time, okay? Since the mid-1800s, it has started to slowly move its way north, okay? Now we have some populations in Canada. We're starting to see outward expansion into the Southwest, okay? And whenever we transplant this species, all right, out to like the Hawaiian Islands or to certain places in California, they do just fine. So they can tolerate a really large array of climatic conditions, and because they can eat lots of different stuff and they don't seem to mind urbanization, they do just fine. I'm in the process right now of getting a manuscript ready for publication, for submission for publication, fingers crossed on the publication part, with one of my colleagues in the biology department and additional colleagues in New York, Florida, and Maryland. And what we have done is we have taken different measurements that we have taken of birds in the Midwest, in the Deep South, and a couple locations, and in New York State. And what we're trying to see is if we see differences in body sizes in these different populations throughout the country. So there's an ecological rule called Bergmann's rule that basically states when you move northward, things get bigger in size. Why might you think that is? Well, it's colder up here, right? Bigger body size helps us cope with that, okay? So that's kind of what we're trying to see here is if Bergmann's rule applies to this species, all right? And what we're finding out is that birds in the north are bigger than birds in the south. Okay, so this could be an adaptation that this species has acquired, which is allowing it to make its way further and further into Canada, slowly making its way northward. Hopefully we'll get this into submission before the end of the year. All right, so why is it such a winner? Cardinals actually can tell us a lot. They can tell us a lot. They've got a lot of unique behavioral characteristics. Both parents feed their offspring. They're territorial. They have unique physiological characteristics as well, like testosterone doesn't really seem to impact their behaviors all that much, at least in the ones that have been assessed. They seem to just cope well with change. The few studies that have been done on immunity show that they seem to handle a lot of diseases that make other species not thrive and not survive even. And why we should study this species, I personally think, is that I think this would be a good one to understand because it could help us understand how to help other species. So it's no secret that things are changing on the planet, okay? And some species are going to cope better than others, all right? If we know what makes the cardinal so exceptional, perhaps we can make some predictions as to other species and see, well, maybe that one's going to do okay because we know the cardinal does this and it's some kind of similar. Or maybe this species isn't going to be okay because it doesn't have any of these similar characteristics with the cardinal. It might be more vulnerable. It might need us to step in and help it out a little bit if we want it to survive, okay? So I thought I'd wrap up my talk by just throwing out some questions that people often ask me about cardinals, okay? So when you work with a really charismatic species, people usually really like to talk about it, and I highly encourage folks to ask me questions. So how do we catch them? How many people have wondered this, okay? How do we catch them? We catch them with nets, okay? This is a mist net here, all right? And it basically looks like a big volleyball net that has these tethers off to the side, and these pockets right here have this mesh that is nearly invisible, okay? We're talking about softer and thinner than fishing line, okay? And the thread is black. So when you put it up front of vegetation, you can't see it. I've had people walk into the nets before. That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. So the birds fly into it, they get tangled up, and they get caught. It doesn't hurt them, okay? We check the nets very, very quickly, all right? In my case, right now, I actually take birds out of the net like immediately after they enter it. Take the birds out, and then we take some measures, and we put some bands on their legs, okay? We put a silver or an aluminum band here from the U.S. Geologic Survey that has a unique band number on it to help identify this bird. And if we're going to do any behavioral work that requires us to follow birds with binoculars, we put these color bands on, and everybody gets a unique color combination. So if we walk by and we see that this bird has yellow over green, silver over black, well, we can pull out our sheet that has all of our bird combinations and see, oh yeah, that's male 323, without having to actually see the tiny number on the band. Okay, we take measures of different parts of their skeleton. We take measures of different parts of their feathers. We also will take blood samples for different studies that we're looking at. Another question I get is, how can you tell an adult cardinal from a juvenile cardinal? Because let's face it, they look a lot alike. They're about the same size. How can you tell them apart? It's the bill. The bill will always tell the tale. Juvenile birds are not going to have that nice red-orange bill yet, okay? This is dependent on diet, okay? The pigments that form that color are going to be obtained from their diet, and it takes time for that acquisition to occur. This bird was hatched just a few months prior. It hasn't had time to get that pigment in its bill yet, okay? These handsome birds here with the nice orange bill, these are full-fledged adults. They have likely already had a breeding season, and they have nice pigment acquisition in their bill structure. All right? And here's just some weird stuff. Anybody ever seen any of these pictures before in birding magazines or on the internet? This yellow bird took the internet by storm a couple of years ago, okay? And for good reason. That's not right. That's not right. But the bird doesn't look sick, and it doesn't look unhealthy at all. Its behavior was, for the most part, correct. Why is it yellow? Well, not only are their bills dependent upon their diet, but their plumage color is too. Okay, so that nice red color on both the males and the female underwings, okay, it's dependent upon carotenoids that they get from food, all right? Males that are brighter usually have a better diet, okay? They take those pigments, all right, and they go through these chemical processes in their body to convert it into what we interpret as red. This bird here has a metabolic deficiency. It's missing an enzyme or two to help take that pigment and make it all the way to that red color, okay? Instead, what it was able to do was take the pigment and convert it into this yellow color here, okay? Every now and then we see these birds. There's nothing wrong with them, all right, unless, you consider they have this enzyme deficiency. The only downside of this is that we don't necessarily know like how much reproductive success this bird has, because let's face it, a female cardinal is going to look at that and say, that's weird. And they might not be willing to take a chance on this individual because bird color of their plumage is often a signal of quality. If you're a better looking bird, mates are going to find you more attractive. All right? Anyone ever seen a picture of this before? Well, on the right side of this bird, it looks like a male. But on the left side of this bird, it looks like a female. Cool, huh? Yeah, it's like a black and white cookie. It's cool. Very rarely do we see these birds, okay? If people see them, they get photographed for days, all right? This is believed to be a bilateral gynandromorph, okay? Very misunderstood. We don't know a lot about it in biology. We're learning more about it. We see it more often in insects, in things like certain crustaceans, lobsters, etc. With birds, okay, what has happened here is half of this bird really is chromosomally male, and half of this bird really is chromosomally female. So somewhere very early on, after conception, very early on in those cell division process, like when we're talking about when the embryo is 8 to 64 cells big, like really, really, really early on, something happened, okay, where both of those chromosomes, that one for male and that one for female, something happened to where it basically split the divide of the body structure of the bird, okay? Because these are so rare, they haven't had an opportunity to really examine them. They don't want to, the only way you would really know for sure would be to actually do an autopsy on this bird to see if it really did have female parts as opposed to male anatomy, etc. But it's believed that, yeah, half of this bird is chromosomally male and half of this bird is chromosomally female. Very, very odd and unusual for it to happen in the avian world, but every now and then we do see it. And last but not least, this actually happens a lot more than we think about. We see a bird that has a bald head. Anybody ever seen this before or seen pictures of it? I've caught a few birds like this. Birds that have crest, so like little tufted titmice and blue jays are more prone to having this happen. But whenever birds molt their feathers in the fall to get nice new feathers for the next breeding season, sometimes something funky happens with that crest, and instead of losing one feather at a time, they just poof. They lose all of them, okay? And instead what you get is this head that looks kind of like a dinosaur, all right? When this bird, we captured this bird and we monitored her for a few months, and after she completed molt, she had a beautiful head of crest feathers, okay? It is possible that this could be also some type of infection that we're not aware of. Nobody's really investigated it very closely. Could it be something fungal? Could it be bacterial? Not really sure. The birds that have the condition don't seem to be suffering. Their health seems to be fine. But nonetheless, it is something that pops up from time to time. If you see it, no worries. That bird will have a full head of feathers whenever they molt fully. So with that, if anybody wants to investigate any of this really cool stuff even further, here are some good things to check out. If you're interested about birds, the Cornell Lab, again, is the mothership for finding out all things bird. If you want to know more about cardinals, the species account is on the Bird of the World site with the Cornell Lab, or you can contact Carrie and contact me at UW-Whitewater. I'm right up the road. I'm one of their newer hires. I've been there since 2018. I'd be more than happy to answer questions. I hear them all the time, and I love hearing stories about cardinals. So all of this work that I'm talking about was not just me. I have lots and lots and lots of people who helped me along the way and who currently help me. A big thank you to them. A big thank you to all of the people who have given me money to help this happen along the way. Hormonal analyses are actually kind of expensive, so big thanks to that. And with that, I'll be glad to take any questions, and thank you so much for listening to me ramble on.
I'll grab this microphone and Jose, do you want to move this microphone over? We'll move this one over here.
Okay, yeah, all right, question.